gender is that it's something that hasn't kept pace with the rest of our knowledge and understanding. So as we've allowed ourselves to progress with other things, gender's been sort of like, oh, we won't talk about that. We'll just tuck that away down there. We're all the same in spirit, so we're not going to talk about being men and women anymore. You know, so we've had this idea psychologically put across because of the sensitivity of the 20th century. But because of this, we've really missed the boat on something. And the point is that, has everybody heard of the term that man is a microcosm of the macrocosm? Everyone familiar with it? Does everybody know what it means? Yeah. Well, what it means is, well, there's different ways it's translated, but one of the meanings is that there are certain laws and interactions of forces that take place on a cosmic level that also take place for us down here, and those rules are the same. And these are certain laws, like some of you may have seen The Secret, which is about the law of attraction, which is the same for us down here as it is for suns and solar systems and galaxies. And the law is the same. And there are certain other laws that are like this. But gender is a principle that comes into the same category. And gender energy is something that's at play 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in every single interaction you have. And it's got absolutely nothing to do with sex. Nothing at all. It's got nothing to do with being a man and a woman. And we'll talk about that in a moment when we look at the differences between gender and sex, or manifest sex, basically. So we get this idea, that, or people are having this idea that we are all the same in spirit, which is true, we are. And at a soul level, we are also all the, we all have the same faculties to bring to bear, we have the same qualities, the same energies at our behest, because we're all in the human mould, whatever that is, the human blueprint. So that means it has all the qualities in it. But that soul then manifests as either a man or a woman. Yeah? So what ends up happening is that while we are all the same in spirit, down here we're different. Down here, some of you are women and some of you are men. And there's clearly a difference there. And to try and gloss over that isn't helping us. And really, what we're going to look at in a second is how across the 20th century, how that's fallen apart. And this is why we now have so many issues with relationship breaking down, problems with community, problems even with our intimacy with even friends and less intimate relationships. So before we do, we're going to have I'm not going to sit here and preach to you about some gender model. What we're going to do is we're going to collectively observe certain generalities about gender or gender ideas, and we're going to see where that takes us. So it's going to be quite interactive in that respect. I'm not here to dictate, I'm here to draw upon all of your experience, and between all of us together, we'll hopefully see how this model is something you can self-check immediately yourself against relationships that you've had and against interactions you've had. Okay, so we're going to go way, way, way back into the past for a while, right back to Ugg and Zog and hunter-gatherer and all the rest of it, back to those times. Because what science tells us these days, and psychology tells us, that the reason men and women have adopted or developed qualitative differences in their interaction with the environment is because they had different tasks. And because they took on those different tasks, they developed those areas. Yeah. Whereas what we're going to look at today is how that's actually the wrong way around. The point was that men and women had qualitative differences anyway, and that was why they ended up polarizing into these different roles, and that these roles actually play themselves out on different levels in different ways. So let's go back to that old idea for a while. So the old idea was, or the old thing that happened was, the man and the men would be the hunter-gatherers. Does everyone agree? Where they would go out and they would patrol the boundary of the territory, they would expand the territory if needs be, and they would bring back whatever they found back to the village or the homestead or whatever, and then it would be given to the women, and then they would have to make room for it in some way. Does everyone agree with that roughly? I mean, obviously we are speaking very generally here, and it's a generalisation.
I wouldn't agree with
Would you
that.
not agree? What would you like to add to it then?
I'd say that the men were perhaps doing more of the hunting and the women were doing more of the gathering.
Okay,
Women
yeah.
were more in tune with plants and foods and herbs and roots and
Fair enough.
materials like that, so they were out as well.
And would you agree, though, that where the women were gathering would be within the territory or the boundary that the men were patrolling?
Perhaps, I don't know.
Right, okay. So if we can then add to that and say, okay, the women were actually very much involved in the gathering, but what I would like to add to that is, it would be more than likely, I'm not saying it would be the case, and so it's about if everyone can come to a common agreement here, it would probably be more than likely that if the women were gathering, it would be within the space that was bounded by the territory of that village or that camp or whatever it was. They were roughly. Okay. So, what actually, we're going to skip forward a bit now, and we're going to see how that's played itself out in more recent times. So if we see that what's actually happened is that if we say that those roles had roughly played themselves out for many, many years, for a long time until it became quite ingrained, didn't it? It got very, very ingrained, and then what ended up happening was we had a problem because one of the genders stagnated. One of the sexes. So let's make the distinction between gender and manifest sex for a moment. Okay. So if we imagine that the masculine and the feminine have with them particular qualities or tools, and when we are manifesting as a particular sex, it's because we want the tools of that particular sex to be able to engage in the world for whatever task it is our soul has ahead of it. Yeah. So I mean, does everyone agree here that gender isn't, or do they accept the idea that gender may not be accidental and it's something that is somewhat of a choice that the soul makes? There's a few nods. Yeah? A few not sure. That's all right.
I don't really understand. Can you just expand a little bit more, unless you're going to go into it?
I'm not going to go into that, no. So really it's about this idea that we create a reality, or that that at a soul level, so at any given time, say there's your personality experience of the world, which can involve trauma, it can involve difficulty, it can involve all these things which are horrible to experience, but that the soul may well have instigated those things for learning, which it doesn't experience in the same way. So we can have something that's terribly traumatic to us as a personality individual, but actually it's something that helps us on the path of soul unfoldment, because it's something that the soul is actually called into action to help us learn about ourselves or about the environment in some way. And so this can often be hard to grasp, especially when people are talking about negative, what are considered to be negative or bad experiences. And what I'm saying is that to extend that idea of creating a reality and drawing the challenges that the soul is called upon to including the choice of manifest sex. So is it being an actual choice that the soul makes to say, right, I want to have these experiences in this life, and to be able to maximize my effectiveness in doing that, the tool set I need is the masculine one, or the tool set I need is the feminine one, or the female one. Yeah, okay. Across the 20th century was something quite stupendous, and it was because of one of the sexes had stagnated in its role to the other, and it was the men. Because what happened was they created a little boys' club for themselves, and they weren't letting the women into it, which, based on the model that we'd looked at before of what the man was supposed to do, which was he was meant to bring back whatever he'd found and bring it back to the female to include in the known and to include it in the world, and then for her to manage all of that space. It was her territory, very much her territory, whereas a man's territory was the boundary or the periphery, whereas her boundary, her area was very much everything else, basically. Everything within that perimeter was the mainstay of the female sort of thing. So what was happening was he was finding these things and he wasn't sharing them, and he wasn't including the women into it, and it stuck like that for a while. Now, we're obviously limited in our consciousness and our ability to understand all the different things that are going on, but there are definitely impersonal, non-human forces. I'm not naming anything, but I'm not naming any form of personality in anything, but there are forces at play in the world and universe which have nothing to do with human personality, but they do affect us. This is where things like astronomy and earth energies and all this sort of work comes from. Is about recognizing the fact that there are forces at play which are more than what us little humans are involved in. And there is a vested interest in the progress of the human race, because it's to do with the Earth's consciousness evolving as well, and we evolve in tandem with that. So if we're stuck, we're affecting everything else on the planet too. So something had to be done to help shift the gender models, because there was a problem, there was an imbalance in them. So as a soul, we all have equal amounts of masculinity and femininity in us. Even while we manifest as a particular sex, it doesn't mean we leave those other qualities behind. We don't. We have them at our behest as well. But it's just that one is more obvious and within our immediate grasp. So the one that's in your manifest sex is the one that's in the immediate grasp, and the other one represents your unknown, your other half, as it were. And this is what relationships play out as. Relationships are the playing out of learning about your unknown, which is why they're so frustrating at times. Through that journey, what happened was, so initially we had things like the movement of the suffragettes, which was the women coming forward and saying, you buggers, let us in, stop playing your little boys club game, yeah? But that wasn't enough. The mental frameworks that were in place in the mind of men at the time was too rigid, it was too formalized. And so something had to be done to remove that stagnant male influence. And this is the positive effect of the world wars. So the wars actually devastated the male gender model, absolutely wiped out millions and millions and millions and millions of them because it was needed. And what actually happened was, as the men were taken away, the first thing that happened was the women moved out from their traditional area and they started to move into the workplace, they started to move into all these areas that they weren't permitted into. And this went in tandem with a number of other things that were going on to help make things shift. But it wasn't enough. So what was happening was, the initial thing that happened was the maleness in women got strengthened. And this was the act of, and we'll talk about what I mean by that when we look at it later on by these qualities. So the women, first of all, made the statement of the fact that it wasn't acceptable what was going on and that there had to be change. So that instigated, that triggered it. And after that, the knock-on effect was, first of all, the old male model being removed. So in all the activities that women then started to take on, that strength, that first of all gave them access to all the things, or almost all the things that they had been excluded from. But the other thing it did was it removed the male influence on the young men that were being brought up. So what it meant was that they could then be influenced by the female. So what started to happen was the femaleness in men began to be strengthened because it was out of balance. So what happened first was the maleness in women was strengthened first to stabilise them. Then the femaleness in men had to be strengthened. And this proceeded through a number of transitional generations, still wasn't enough, still hadn't enough change. So there was another world war which had a massive effect, especially on the European model of gender, because that was very, very ingrained, and this is very much where the heartland of the capitalist way of being came from, sort of thing. So then in the post-World War II era, we were in major disarray. This is why we've had a massive, massive increase in divorce rates, in gender confusion, in homosexuality and transgender, and all of these things where what was previously this really defined sexuality or this really defined gender was suddenly all a bit grey. And nobody was really sure anymore what it meant to be a man or what it meant to be a woman. The traditional roles had changed. The man was no longer hunting and gathering. Both men and women were allowed in the workplace, and both were involved in maintaining the home. So we're actually still in the midst of that transition. We haven't yet found a new foundation to stand upon, which is where relationships are still going. All of us in our own individual relationships are exploring the possibilities of how to manage in this way. And this is all relationships, doesn't matter what kind, whether it's between transgender, homosexual, heterosexual, whatever. All of these are all about, and we'll have a look at each of those different ones later on to see what plays out in the gender energy that's at play. But all of us are in the midst of finding out what it is to try and make that work. Now, the reason we have to make that work is because before, if we remember the chakra model again, is everyone here familiar with the chakras? Yeah? Okay, so in the chakra system, humanity is evolving through the chakras. So we've gone through the physical, the root chakra, which is very much about understanding how to get about in the world and just survive. Then we moved into emotional, second center consciousness, which was very much recent history, which was very much driven by the desires, driven by the astral, driven by the emotional, all of us being at the behest of emotion and devotion, basically. And very much all the old religions were very much to cater to that level of consciousness, which was where there wasn't a mental awakening, which was why they were all about devotion, because the humanity hadn't awakened mentally yet. So you couldn't engage in an intelligent conversation about the divine. So this is why faith, you were told all you had to do was have faith. But now humanity has moved into the mental consciousness, and it's turning around and it's saying, right, okay, I want an intelligent relationship with the divine, sort of thing. And traditional religion doesn't answer it. And we think it's because there's something wrong with the religion altogether, but it's not. It's because it was given for a particular area of human consciousness, and now we're all in the midst, all of us are part of that journey of discovering what it is to have an intellectual, reasoned and understandable interaction with our environment. Now, what's interesting about those is that those three worlds represent the lower self or personality. You can get by just with body, emotions and mind. You can have kids, you can be successful, you can contribute to society, you can do all of that without ever accessing higher self, without ever touching any of the other realms of the soul of the observer. And this is why it's called the lower self or personality, because it's a self-contained unit. It can function on its own. It doesn't need to have soul activity going on, although the soul will always influence. But what's interesting is that because we are now prepared, now what happens is, because the vibrations of each of the bodies is faster vibration, the time it takes to explore those areas gets shorter. So our first period in the physical was the longest, all the caveman times, you know, mastering fire, all these sorts of things, manipulating the materials of the world. The second level was the emotional, so it was the second longest. Now we're in the mental, it's been a bit quicker, and we're preparing to go for the next one, which is quicker again. This is why we have the sense of a quickening and a shifting of time. And it's because the substances we're interacting with and the way we're experiencing things is at a higher vibration, so we experience it quicker. But what's interesting is the transition we're going through, we're preparing for now, is from the mental to the next level, which is the first base level of the higher self or soul, which is actually a window into a whole new world. It's a whole new world set, it's a whole new self-contained unit basically. But in that self-contained unit, as we said earlier, we're all the same. We all have equal amounts of masculine and feminine, which is why we've had to go through this process of gender transition, so that we're both sexes are balanced in their ability to use both the masculine and the feminine qualities for when we get to that, in preparation for that transition time. Because we couldn't hit that transition time without these being stabilised and balanced and equalised in both the sexes, because otherwise we'd still be polarised and we'd be codependent, and we'd have all of those issues going on that we've had for many, many years. So really, you know, one way of looking at the 20th century is one of great horror and terror and horrible things and all the rest of it. But there is always this higher correspondence going on. There is always a higher divine purpose that's being served by these things, even though it doesn't always seem like it when you're in the midst of it. And certainly in the context of this, the benefit to the gender models and relationships in general is going to be massive because of this very, very, you know, difficult time. But it means that we're still in the midst of a very, very difficult time because we haven't actually ironed out any of these things. So really, that's where we're up to for that section, basically, which is just to say that, you know, gender is something that we have greatly overlooked. We're going to have a look in a minute about what I mean by gender and how it all plays itself out and how the interaction takes place and what that links to macrocosmically. So we're going to look at it very simply on the microcosmic level and see how actually it is actually pointing us to something macrocosmic that is tremendously profound. And the other thing I was always is to recognise the fact of this transition and the fact that we are transitional just now, and to be okay with that and to be alright with the fact that we're in a process, and to recognise that when you are trying to hammer things out with your partner and work out how, you know, how's the house going to be managed and how are the bills going to be managed and how all this stuff is going on, this is something that we're all going through, and we're all trying to work that out in our own little units of pairs, you know, whatever those pairs are made up of. Yeah. Okay, so before I move on, does anyone have any questions? Yes, Jill?
Well, just, you know, because it is just the 20th century.
No, I know.
So, you know, it's an ongoing thing, and I don't, it feels like it all seems to fit into a higher purpose.
Yeah.
But, you know, what about, you know, actually it was because, you know, men wanted power and, you know, all the competitive and all the evolutionary reasons, and surely that's an ongoing evolutionary process.
It is part of it. It is exactly. This is what I mean. It is very much about a process, and the only reason I picked on the 20th century is because it was a bit of a peak. But there's no doubt the currents that gave rise to what happened to that were put into play long before then. Possibly even probably hundreds of years before then, because that thousands, absolutely. You can't get that sort of bubbling up of that amount of energy without there being a long process of the building up towards it. You know, it's been a long process, and you're absolutely right about all the things. Because I mean, I'm not underplaying the fact of what I meant when one of the sexes had stagnated. It was massive. It was a massive stagnation. It was a major problem. It was a major problem, and I mean, for something as drastic to be needed as what happened, which was this mass clearing out of millions of men, basically.
We've still got patriarchy now.
We do still have it, but this is the thing. I mean, we had the conversation earlier about how change is coming and how the ball of change is rolling, and this is the point. And the point of this work is the fact that I'm making the point that while we're doing all this other work, we're still neglecting gender, and while we do, it'll still slap us, and it'll still dominate us, just like any other thing that we neglect does. So if you neglect an aspect of yourself, it's going to control you rather than you controlling it. And my point is that is what we're doing with gender as well. And so we're at the behest of our relationships rather than understanding how to work on them. We're at the behest of all these different things rather than understanding what we can do about it in a proactive way, but working with the actual subject of gender and what it actually is. So we'll go into that just now and just see what macrocosmic thing I might be hinting at with the microcosm. And to do that, we're going to have to talk about sex. Okay? So here we go. This is going to be funny. Is everybody ready? All right. Now then, So I'm going to put here, I'm going to put for male and female for a reason. We're going to get to the correspondences in a bit, so bear with me here. Okay, so let's think about the sexual process. Okay, so in the sexual process, who is it that normally tries to instigate it?
What, sex?
Yes.
Depends what time of the month.
That is absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yes, very, very true. Okay, but in general, if we're going to use these, we are going to use generalizations for a reason. We'll show you why. We're going to move from the general to the specific. So we're going to move, it's very sort of like a scientific approach is to move from the general to the particular. And that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to start general, and then we're going to look at absolute particulars. And we're going to look at different types of relationship as well to show how it fits in all the various ones. Okay. So in general, who would instigate it? Or who's known to instigate it?
Well, the general stereotype is that the man does.
Thank you. We're talking about general stereotypes here. Yeah, we are talking about general stereotypes. So the man would instigate it. So what's the first thing he tries to do?
Be nice.
Be nice. So what's the object of being nice? What's his intention?
To get in your pants.
Yeah, that's the end goal. We're going to get to that at the end goal, definitely. The goal is to get in your pants, totally. So there's a process there, though, isn't it? It's not just step 1 to step 2, is it? So
He's
what is
checking
that
you
first
out.
one?
He's like
So what's that
trying to
doing?
make an assessment of what
What's
whether
you're
whether he
Yeah.
wants you or not. And
so
softening
what
you
does
up.
softening you up? Yeah, absolutely. So
Making you
what's that
like it.
implying? What's he trying to do to you?
Yeah.
What's he trying to do to you? He's trying to get you interested, isn't he? Yeah.
he's almost he's feeding your ego as well. So, you know, you kind of go, oh yeah.
Yeah. So what's the result of that? Is there a word for it? No. I'm going to put a word to it and see if you're all right with it. The word I'm going to use is arousal. It tries to arouse you. So that can be through being nice to you, it can be through flattening your ego, it can be through any form of manipulation or, whatever kind of little sideline ways you might do to try to, like you say, get in your pants, basically. So, if we said that he tries to arouse the female, okay. So what does the female have to do if he's trying to arouse you?
Not a right lot.
Yeah, there is that, but there is one thing you have to do if he's going to be successful, or if you're both going to be successful, then what do you have to do?
Has to be
Get naked, bring
acknowledgement.
food. Done.
Acknowledgement. Now that acknowledgement is, I'm going to sum that up to be, you have to be open to it. Right? You have to be open to his efforts to arouse. Yeah? You have to be open to it. If you're not open to it, and he's trying to arouse you, then it's not going to happen, is it? Yeah? Or if it does, we have a word for that, don't we?
Right.
It's called rape, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that later on as well when we look at some of these other correspondences. So it's really important that the woman is open in this, the female in this context is open, because otherwise the rest isn't going to happen. Yeah, it's just not going to happen. So what's the next step then? If the arousal's taking place and it's like, oh, definitely in here, and we've got to the stage where the knickers are off. So what's the next stage?
Penetration.
Thank you, penetration. Of course, if we're going to be very politically correct and modern people and all this, we put foreplay in there. But let's get right to the nitty gritty. We're going to say it's penetration. Yeah, no messing about here. No messing about. Get in there. Did you hear her? First of all, in the knickers, penetration. She knows what she's about. She knows what she's talking about. Get in there. So yeah, it's penetration. Absolutely. Okay. And again, during the penetration process, the female still has to be open to that. Yeah? Because during the arousal process, you can get switched off, can you? Like, oh, no. Yeah? Don't want to do that now. Change my mind, something like that. So there has to be an ongoing and maintenance of the arousal process right the way up to it and including the penetration. So then, once this has taken place, there's a process that goes on, isn't it? Now that process I'm just going to call adjustment and alignment. Okay, so this is during the act itself. So all that moving around and shuffling around and all the rest of it, trying to get a greater sense of closeness and connection and more feeling like one and all this sort of stuff. So it's all very much about alignment. And the more you get to know a partner and the more you explore and the more you journey together, the closer you get, basically. The more aligned you become on all the different levels. I mean, there's no doubt that the journey that we're on in a relationship is a journey we're on an individual journey through the chakras, but when we get together with a partner, we go on a joint journey through the chakras with them. And the first taste that we get, that whole honeymoon bliss idea, is the ideal. It's the potential. It's the possibility. And then you get faced with the fact of, okay, can we anchor that possibility? Can we make it real? And then you go through the journey of each of you connecting on the different levels, but that includes your own baggage being involved, your own issues, all of these different things. So we'll look, at the end, we're going to look at intimate relationships to see all of the different things that are at play, because you've got your own issues, your partner has their own issues, then you have the working on the relationship and all this sort of stuff. So there's tons and tons and tons of different things at play there. And during that journey, obviously, it's all about making adjustments and coming into closer alignment with each other. So if that all goes well and the alignment's going well and all the rest of it, we get to the next part. So what's the next part? Orgasm, climax, absolutely. So in climax, what happens is, you know, if we're looking at it from the point of view of conception or making babies, then it would be, we're just going to call it, we'll call it orgasm or climax. Oops, I can't even spell climax. And what that represents is really the planting of a seed. Okay, which is obviously carried in the sperm or the semen of the man. If the seed is well planted, then we have this thing we call conception. Yeah? So then we would have conception. And then, as far as a man is concerned, there's not much more he can do apart from look after the needs of the female while she is carrying the baby. So what's going on for the female at this point is that she has to conceive, so conception, so that's conceive, and she has to nurture. Because if she doesn't nurture that seed, things can go wrong, can't they? You can have miscarriages, you can have abortions, you can have deformities at birth, you can have all these different things where if the woman doesn't look after herself well enough, then all of these things can affect the baby that's born.
So how the man, how he looked after him.
Exactly. Sorry?
While his sperm was being formed.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Right in it, because the quality of the sperm is greatly affected.
What they had and what their parents had.
Absolutely. There's the genetics, there's the energy, there's the diet, there's a state of consciousness. All of these things affect the quality of the conception. Totally, it does affect the quality of the conception. And then, if we're lucky and all of this has chained on and taken place, then we have birth. Something interesting about birth, though, because the thing that's born is completely different from the seed that was planted, isn't it? Totally different. Just completely different thing. It's like, how did you come from that? You know what I mean? It's like, where did that come from? Quite an amazing thing. So, what's interesting...
That's only if you're a man. If you're a woman, you're completely connected to it, and you can see how it's part of you. You can... I mean, you have been intimately connected to it as well.
Totally different, yeah. It's a totally different experience. Totally different, because you've been involved throughout this process. So you have a completely different relationship with the thing that is given birth to. But what's interesting is now that we've sort of like put this little map there, we're going to actually see that this is actually something that relates to some higher correspondences. And actually, there's three things we're going to look at here today about what this relates to. And this relates to the relationship between the soul and the personality. It relates to the transmission and exchange of ideas. And it relates to all of the interactions that you have with people on a daily basis. So I'll validate that now. So let's look at the example of you, the soul and the personality just now. So the soul, first of all, seeks to arouse your interest. Seeks to arouse the interest of the person. It tries to get you interested in matters. This is what is known as the silent voice or intuition at first. If you are open to that, then great. The soul will move in for penetration. If not, then you just carry on. Because the soul will not rape. It will not do it. It won't do it. It'll wait until you're open, until you're receptive, until you're ready. Then if you are, it'll penetrate you with its purpose. You'll start to have an inkling, an awakening, or of something that you're drawn to doing, or something that you feel affiliated to, or something you feel passionate about. And these things tend to come from intuitional guidance or from our own reasoned process and things like that. It's a combination of the two, but usually there is some guidance from the soul that has set us up in the environments that we find ourselves in. So the soul will penetrate with its purpose. Then the process of alignment and adjustment is most of the life journey. So we have this gradual penetration by the soul and then the withdrawal, just like we have in sexual encounters, which is when we have those moments of deep connectedness and awakening and enlightenment, and then suddenly feeling that we're isolated and left alone again, suddenly feeling we're all connected etc., etc. And this process goes on. And if we respond like we do in the lovemaking act, where we make the adjustments and we try to get into a better position and all this sort of stuff, then the penetrations will get deeper and the sense of connectedness with the soul will get stronger. Or if we don't, it will retract and we'll become more distant. It's an exact correspondence, that's the point. So then, what happens is something spectacular if we get that right. Something absolutely amazing. And it's called the coming of the soul. It's the coming of the soul. The coming of the soul is an astonishing event, and it makes normal organisms look like something completely different. It's off the charts. But it's very interesting because once that happens, this is one of what's called the initiations of the bodhisattva levels. Once that happens, that's not the end of it. That's just the planting of the seed. And there are many people who have had an experience of the coming of the soul at some point in their life, which is a true realization of what your purpose is and what you're here to do. Once that happens, you as a personality then need to nurture that and conceive with it. And so you then have to take that internal experience that you've had and somehow integrate it and interface it into the outside world, which is very like what we were talking about earlier in the hunter-gatherer time, where the male energy would bring into something new and then the female energy had to make it fit, sort of thing. And that's what we all have to do in response to the soul. So whatever experiences we're having in that internal sense, we have to make room for it in our world. If we don't, then we're in chaos, or we can't make time for all those things. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that, because you've not made room for it. You've not made room for those different bits. And then if we've done well enough with that, and we nurture it well enough, then something completely new is brought to birth, which is the integration of soul and personality, which is you being yourself. That's the ultimate goal. And they say, be yourself, yeah? Just be yourself. Sounds like the easiest thing in the world, doesn't it? But you can just be yourself watching telly for 20 years. Not a lot happens, does it? I'm just being myself. And it's because you don't be yourself. You become the self. It's a process of becoming. You become the self. And in that term, has anyone ever heard of the process of becoming? It's used in certain traditions don't use the word being yourself. They say we're in the process of becoming. And that's just because a lot of the work I do is on language and how hidden in language are these different terminologies. It shows we're missing things. And actually in here, this is about being and coming. And being is a feminine principle, which is that of total acceptance. Not just of acceptance, but of that beingness of just accepting things as they are. And then what we have is the coming, which is a masculine energy, which is also why men are a bit sexually obsessed all the time, is because that's very much the quality they're trying to manage. So the coming is a masculine, which is that picking out of detail and differences. Any woman, if you've been annoyed by your boyfriend who picks out always picking on the nitty-gritty details or anything like that, yeah. And it's because he can't help it. Or he wants to sit and talk to you about things. Well, it's because he doesn't know. He doesn't know that he's at the behest of this energy that's doing this. It's ruling him rather than him ruling it and knowing how to use it. So actually, at all times, we are in a balance between these two. Because right now, we're in a state where we can say, well, we totally accept the environment we're in, we accept the grass that we're on, we accept the yurt that we're in, we accept the other people in the room. But then we might start to feel a little bit cold and say, oh, I'm a little bit cold. Or, oh, I'm getting a bit thirsty, or things like this. And this is this balance between the two where the being side is when we can say, all right, everything in the universe is perfect, it's just right as it is right now, because everybody's getting exactly what they need right at this moment. But if that was the case, why is it we can also sit and say, oh, this could be different, or this could be better, or that could do with a bit of improvement, or that could be touched up. And that is the eternal paradox between these two. It's the fact that we can be completely accepting and we can completely see the perfection in everything, but we can also pick out differences about things that we might want to change. So we do that in our own life. There are things we accept about ourselves and there are things we want to change. And these are how the different qualities play themselves out. And that's the point. These are qualities. They're not absolutes. It's like a piece of string. When does left become right? When does up become down? Gender is a bit like that. It's a bit relative. And it's interesting because, is everyone familiar with the yin and yang symbol? Yeah? And the interesting thing about yin and yang is that, for starters, they are bounded. There's something that's maintaining the boundary there that we tend to ignore. But there's another interesting thing. We'll talk about it a bit more later on. But if we imagine that, if we said that this was masculinity, so around here, masculinity is very defined about its masculinity, it's very clear about what masculine is. And over here, femininity is very clear about what being female is, and femininity is very strong. But what's interesting is, as we approach here, because obviously here is still masculinity and here is still femininity, isn't it? On that little map. But the problem is, as we approach here, in whatever our exchanges are, we have a thing called gender tension that gets created because you're getting close to that boundary line where it's a bit hard to see the difference between the two. And this is where, has anybody ever had a debate, an issue with a partner where you've both been talking about the same thing? You've been arguing about something and then you realise you've been talking about the same thing from completely different points of view. And it's been really tense and all the rest of it. That's gender tension playing itself out. That's the two different points of view approaching from the different points. And gender tension is tricky because it messes relationships up because people aren't aware when it's like, oh, we're at a point of gender tension here, let's back off, let's observe, like, I'm going to pay attention to you now, let me listen to what you're saying because I'm aware I'm in this point of tension, so there's something here for me, basically. Whereas to be aware that that's what it is and not to see things at face value and think that your partner isn't listening to you or they don't understand your point of view or things like that is something else that's at play here, which is this thing, which is gender tension, which is the line, almost like coming to the line between the two. So, the example we looked at first of all was the soul and the personality. Now, this workshop is something that is not, this is just an introduction, you know, you're looking at a weekend workshop with all of this where we would actually look at your individual relationships, so you would come along with your partner and we would do individual workshops where you can work on your own issues, basically, your own things, and talk about it and apply this model and see how things work out. Now, this model is actually what, on the mental plane and the emotional plane, this is actually how ideas are exchanged, how we communicate in every single interaction we have with a right penetrate a line. So, let's look at this workshop. So what I've been trying to do is arouse your interest. We're trying to get you interested. I'll be looking around to see if you're open. If you are, I'll be trying to penetrate you with the idea that there is something about gender. Yeah? And then, through the course of the workshop, get into alignment with you a bit more so I can get down to some of the deeper subjects. So the seed is well planted, because you can plant a seed badly. If you think about planting a seed in a garden, if you chuck it on the gravel, then it's not really going to grow. Whereas if you take some time to make a little bed, and then pop it in and water it and all the rest of it, then the seed should grow well. And then what you guys have to do is, with this, you've got to choose whether you want to nurture or conceive with this idea or not. It's a choice. You have to, as with me being in the male role in this instance because of this, then you have to then make that choice. And so you can choose to abort it. You can be like, right, I'm not interested, that's a crap idea, get rid of it. Or you could choose to say, okay, I'm going to accept that in, and I'm going to nurture that, and I'm going to see how that plays itself out. If the seed's well planted and you're good at nurturing, then there should be a healthy birth. But what's interesting is the way in which it comes to birth in you will be totally different to my understanding. It will be your understanding based on your interaction with the world. But obviously we have all the other things that can go wrong there with miscarriage, abortion, deformity at birth, all these sorts of things. Another good way of seeing where this applies is children. It's great to look at children for this one, because children are always feminine relative to both parents. So both parents are always masculine. There's this interesting thing about how the roles play themselves out, because the male role is always the one pointing something out, or with something pointing out. Yeah? So the male role is the one that's pointing something out. So whether you're a man or a woman is irrelevant. If you're the one pointing something out, then you're in the male role, that's it. It's nothing to do with sex, it's to do with the gender of it. So get that into your head, it's about the gender. So if you're pointing something out, so this can shift many times in a conversation. So I could be pointing something out, then you could point something out to me. Yeah, etc., etc. So what happens is exactly the same. You've got to be open to receive. Then the person can penetrate. Then the seed can be planted. Then nurture and conceive. But this doesn't happen for most people. Because what happens is somebody always has to be in the male role. But most people like their own inner male. They don't like listening to other people representing the male. So what tends to happen is, if you don't like the way somebody else is pointing, whatever it is, then you'll automatically switch and listen to your own inner male and be like, right, I know better, I'm not going to pay attention, I'm going to do this instead, yeah, or something like that, which we all do in different. The boss, when the boss is talking, you try to tell you what to do, and you're like, well, you're an idiot, I'm not listening to you. You know what I mean? But this is where we switch off. So we switch, when we end that process, it finishes there. So none of this takes place, and this is why in workplaces, there's low productivity in this country, because nobody understands the processes involved in the exchange of ideas and in the transmission of ideas and intention. So children are a good example, because we can talk about some of the challenges involved. So both parents are always trying to arouse the child's interest. But the problem is with children, it can get very, very frustrating over time. And so what ends up happening is very, very common that parents will then no longer wait for the child to be open and receptive. And so they'll maybe scream an idea at the child, or, whatever it is, when you lose your temper with them and things like that, which is it becomes a form of mental rape. Because the child isn't open to it, and what ends up happening is they either abort, or they miscarry, or something deformed comes out. All of these things happen because we've not applied the strategy we would apply if we were going to have sex, which would be, first arousal didn't work, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try something else again. I'm going to if you think about some of the guys that have hassled you over the years, some of them are pretty persistent, aren't they? And they'll try all these different things. But that's what we're invited to do. It's good to look at these stereotypes and laugh about it, because looking at that generic general behaviour, we can actually see that people are being driven by these qualities. They're not aware of it. They're being driven by them, and that's why we can observe it and say, yes, so they are. So what's actually happening is they're driven to find these different strategies for arousal. So that's what each of us has to do. If we're looking to get ideas across, if you want to talk to somebody about climate change or permaculture or whatever it is, don't ram it down their throat. It's not going to work. They're going to abort it, or they're going to miscarry it, or something like that. Take the time to step back and say, well, okay, strategize. There's somebody there that you're attracted to for whatever reason. What am I going to do? Okay, that effort didn't work. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to keep trying something else until you're open, or until I give up and go somewhere else. One of those two. And this is something we have to engage in all of our little exchanges. So being open, receptive, then penetrating with the idea. Kids are a good example, because anybody in here a parent? Yeah. Isn't it interesting how have you ever noticed how you can give them an idea, and a while later they'll come back and they'll say something about it, and you'll be like, wow, because it shows that they got it in the wrong way, and you're surprised by their take on it, aren't you? And it's because of this difference between what's birthed and what's planted. It's like planting a seed and getting a plant. They're totally different things. But we have to give them the chance to foster that beauty, basically, because often what we expect somebody to repeat something in the way that we understand it. Or we want people to understand something in the way that we understand it, rather than inviting them to nurture the idea and let them come to their own conclusion with it. Let them give birth to their own idea, or their own offshoot to it, which is the genuine way to get somebody to integrate an idea or something like that. So this plays out all the time with children, because both the parents are always pointing out. So the first thing is, the one in the male role has to point out what the thing is. So whoever's pointing something out is in the male role. The second thing, then this is where men have gone wrong in the past, and where a lot of people in the male role, whether you're a man or a woman, still get it wrong. Because the second thing is that you have to do what's called prescribe the method. And prescribing the method is about how it should be done. So somebody who discovers the way to do chakra healing says, okay, chakra healing is what I want to point out to you. Here is how you do it. Yeah? How to boil a kettle is what I want to point out to you. Here is how to do it. Yeah? So the method is very important, because the method is part of achieving the outcome. The interesting thing is, and where it's got wrong, is that this has taken the form of dictation, or dictating, or telling somebody, which in most cases is an act of hypocrisy, because the person isn't doing it themselves. What it means by prescribing the method is that you demonstrate by example. You demonstrate by example, which is why so many, the interesting thing, men have a massive challenge in the current time, because the maleness in women was strengthened first. The men have a very, very strong male archetype in women to try and prove themselves to try and say, hey, well, look, I can actually point out to some interesting areas that, maybe you can't point out to, sort of thing. And the reason for that is because this is why men had a lot of energetic differences to women, why they were built more muscularly, they had more dynamic force, but women always had more stamina. And it was because in the Toltec tradition, which is what got me started on the path of looking at gender over 10 years ago, what they were talking about was, man was given that spark of energy, just a spark, to be able to withstand the force of the unknown, to be able to make little forays into the unknown and not know what you're going to be up against, to be able to cope and then return. Which is why we have that spark idea, the short orgasm of the man but the longer orgasm of the woman, sort of thing. That spark from the man, then he's burnt out. And it's because that's his purpose, is to go try and make these short bursts into the unknown, but face whatever forces are there, and then bring back something useful. And this is actually where it started to go wrong, because men, not just men, both genders, had hunted and gathered on the physical, emotional and mental plane, and they'd stopped there. They'd stopped actually exploring into the next chakra levels, which is that of the heart and the the fourth level, and the higher ones from that. And that was what the problem was. And obviously this is what has happened in the last 50 years or so, is that people of both sexes, because in that realm we are both equal, both have been going out, finding new information and bringing it back for all of us to then anchor by, first of all, pointing out the subject, then prescribing the method. The third thing is something that is very reflected in our society just now as being neglected, and that is the maintaining of the boundaries and the structures. So defining the boundary. So chakra healing is this, it is not more than that sort of thing. Here is the boundary of the thing that we're going to work in. Yeah. What is the framework? Because if something's unbounded, if there's no boundary to it, then you get lost. You get lost in endless chains of ideas or sequences or whatever it is, because nothing is containing it. And interestingly, if we look at what's happened in our society, what's happened is because there's been no boundaries enforced on our children, and that's what they actually want, is a boundary, then they're constantly testing it to say, okay, where's the boundary? Where's the boundary? I'm going to act more crazy. I'm going to be more mad. I'm going to be more mental. Show me the boundary. Show me the boundary. I'm going to start killing people. I'm going to start stabbing people. Where's the boundary? You know, I'm going to start raging like a madman. Show me the boundary. And actually, all they're looking for is a boundary, because then you know what the world is. The world is contained, you know, and it's manageable. So boundaries are very, very important. They're very, very healthy. They're healthy for yourself and your relationship with your partner to have healthy boundaries, and it's also important for us to have them socially as well. You know, it's very much, you know, we're because of the whole be yourself thing and just about being, we've become overly tolerant to the point where it's become unacceptable to say it's unacceptable. You know, it's become not okay to say something is not okay. You know, we're not allowed to anymore. You've got to tolerate absolutely everything. And obviously inside ourselves we know that there is something a bit wrong with that, you know, and it's not about anybody judging, it's about what's going to happen. What is going to happen is, because of us going through this boundaryless period, we're all going to come to the same realization about, actually, structure has value. Structure does have value. Structure has value in our bodies. If your kidney started slipping over down to where your intestine was, it wouldn't be doing much good. And if your lungs started to drop back down into your backside, you know, you might start to struggle to breathe. So structure is very, very important, and it's present everywhere in the world. And it's something that we've, you know, in our avoidance of certain issues, especially gender, we've lost this sense of boundary. And actually, if we use yin and yang again, what's actually happened is, what society and psychology have tried to do is, they've tried to get rid of this. They've tried to get rid of the defining line between the two. And so we've ended up in this big muddle. And that's reflected in our society, it's reflected in our relationships, whereas we can all take a handle on this. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just say, on that way you've been describing, it's helped to clarify a conversation I'd had with somebody recently, because I was trying to explain that the children were actually pointing out to the parents that they were not following the method of supplying the boundaries in that sense as well.
You make sorry, go on.
No, that's what I was just, you know, it makes sense then when you're saying that, because the parents aren't living what they're saying.
Absolutely, exactly. They're telling the kids to do something right. Don't smoke, don't have sex, kids. But we're off to have, you know, some fags and some sex. Do you know what I mean? And the kids are aware it's going on. They can smell the tobacco smoke and they can hear the noises. They're not daft. Do you know what I mean? And they see the hypocrisy. That's the first betrayal. The first betrayal is by the parents. And that's what then sets a lot of us up on our path to feeling isolated and to having emotional issues in this world, is because of that situation. And it's a catch-22. It's very, very difficult to overcome that. You can't. It's part of the journey of being a human, is to explore all those challenges. But you made a very good point. And the very interesting thing is that it's actually, and this all takes place subconsciously, so there's no ego fluffing going on here. It takes it subconsciously, but what happens is we all point out to each other what is needed. And it's generally what happens is the female actually subconsciously, because she represents, have you ever seen the correspondence of the male and the female as being the line in the circle? Where the line is the male and the circle is the female. And she represents wholeness and he represents division. Have you not seen that? Right. Well, the circle is often used to represent femininity, the earth, things like that, and wholeness, completeness, all of these things. And it's because representatively she represents everything. Because, you know, the X and the Y chromosome, you know, the whole sort of thing, having the whole balance in there. So interestingly, all that should ever really be happening is, if somebody's pointing something out, if it's true and it's real, it should be something that you already recognise in you. It should be somebody helping you remember something or highlight a detail that you didn't know was already there, but it was already there. And that's the big point, is whenever, somebody is pointing something out, if it's a real thing and it's something profound and progressive, then it should be something that that it's like, oh yeah, you've helped me remember that, or I was doing that anyway and I didn't notice, or is that, I was aware of that, and it becomes something that you can already see in yourself. So it's very much, whoever's in the female role generally puts the call out for what is needed. So let's look at that idea of the suffragettes again. The call was put out by the females there, saying, right, change is needed. So they were actually saying, they were pushing that boundary to say, right, we've managed everything you've given us. We're looking for the next thing. Get out. Kick him up the arse. Get out and go and hunt something else. Go and bring something else in. We've got all of this. We've mastered all this. Give us something else. And so that pressure does come from the female. And this is what's happening by exactly what you say. From the children, from other people in society, the pressure comes from there to say, that's that call for help. Like you said, it's that screaming for boundary. And and now we're having people talking about squads on the street to manage the kids and things like that. And it's like, well, actually, if it was dealt with at the home, then there would be no need for it. And if we had that, in community in general, if we had stronger examples of what it is to be a man, and examples of there's a lot more good examples of what it is to be a woman at the minute than it is to be a man. And certainly that was what put me on the path to exploring gender as a young lad. And that was, I grew up in a house full of women, and I consciously remember when I first started on all this stuff, I was about 11 or 12, and I was just looking around in the world. My own father figure was a disaster to me, and I was so in trauma from that I was just like, I was looking around the world for what I thought was a healthy male model, and I was like, there's none. You know what I mean? I was like, there's nobody there who I think exhibits what it is to be a man. What is a good man? I'm not seeing it. So then I was like, well, I'm going to try and find out for myself. Somehow, I never thought about it consciously again for a while, even though it was always there. And then I came upon working upon gender consciously for about the last 10 years or so, which is where this has come from. But this model isn't mine. I didn't come up with this. I got this from the talk. I'll give you the quotes at the end of where you can look for. But I'm presenting it in a way that I've experienced it. So the way you read about it when I give you the books at the end, it's not quite like this, but I've been working with this for the last 10 years or so, and this is my sort of summation of what's in this book. It's a bit simpler. So the maintaining of the boundaries is very important as well. And so really, if we go back to this idea of the exchange of ideas, this very much applies as well. So let's talk about, showing a child how to do the cooking and things like that. So you're pointing out what it is you want to do, which is, let's show how to prepare a meal, show the method, okay, you chop vegetables like this and you do this sort of thing, but then maintaining the boundaries. It's like, okay, sharp knives stay in the kitchen. You don't play with knives, you use them to chop food, not for other things. Don't go and chop your friend's finger up with them and things like that. Very simple things. I'm using simplistic examples, but it's to make the point, whereas all these things are actually at play in every exchange of ideas. So if you're an employer and you have staff, then you're the one who's meant to be pointing out what to do. Okay, here's the company, here's what we're doing, this is going to be your job, but generally what happens is they don't wait to see if you're open and receptive, they just ram it down your throat. That is essentially your male and their male crossing swords. It's like, yeah, you want to point out to me, but I want to point out to you. And everybody's just waiting. No, I don't care if you want to point out, I'm just going to wait until I can point out to you. And actually, I don't really care if I manage to penetrate you or if I manage to plant the seed, I don't really care. I just want to point out to you. And that's it. Which is a very simplistic way of looking at it. But if you think about it, this is very much manifest in the ideas of, lots of men who are only interested in getting their end away. All they're interested in is having sex and that's it. And this is almost manifesting because we're doing that. We're not being present in our interactions. We're not being present to what other people may have to share with us from their experience and whatnot. We're not aware of when it's appropriate to be in which mode. But it's a choice. We can be in our male mode or we can be in our female mode at any time, and the key is knowing when it's appropriate to be in which. When it's appropriate to be in your male mode, when it's appropriate to be in your female mode. So sometimes you might go into a situation in your male mode, like, I want to do some pointing out here, but then somebody else picks up and it's like, I need to switch. Because you do have to make that switch, because if not, you'll just be waiting to talk. But you have to switch to then be open and receptive. Give them a chance. If they're not being interested, then, if they're not being interesting and they're not arousing you, then fine, shut off to them. Get up and walk off and do something else, whatever. But be aware that there's a choice at play there. There is a choice, and it will control you if you don't control it. Yeah, very much so. And we find that this will affect every relationship you have. It will affect the quality that you can give to people. It will affect the quality they feel they receive from you. Whether you're a good listener, whether you're attentive to what they have to say, whether you're interested in what they have to share with you. Whether you're interested in them as a person or whether you're just there to self-flagellate in their face, basically, which is what a lot is going on, where people are just spewing their ideas out to each other without actually waiting to hear what others have to share with them. And we are interdependent. We do all share. I learn from you guys just as you learn from me, and all these different things. This happens, and we have to respect that process and respect the fact that while I may be being in the male role here, there are plenty of things where you guys are going to be in the male role for me, and you'll be able to point out things to me about your experience, about things that you're experienced at, and I'll be open to that. And that's the beauty of understanding the gender model, and how actually this is at play all the time. And if you can use it in that way, you can have much healthier exchanges of ideas. You can have much healthier transmission of your ideas to others. Much healthier. You can be much more effective, much more powerful, and much more respectful, because you're going to allow people to take the idea and go away with it. And if you go and plant a seed, you're not going to get, you don't get a baby the next day. You don't get a plant the next day, do you? You're going to come back next year. And it is a bit like that. You've got to give it serious time, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is. I do workshops with people, and it's amazing how many people who maybe come back a year later and they're like, I started to get that, and then they'll come out with their own experiences, and I'm like, brilliant. And it's amazing to see that. Just like you see with the kids, you give them an idea, and they maybe come back 6 months, a year later, something like that. And it's phenomenal. So, what we're going to do now is...
Can I just ask something about that?
Yeah.
You're saying that let me just get this right. The man tries to arouse the woman.
Yes.
And then the woman is either open or not.
Initially, yes.
Would it not be also the case that the woman is either open or not initially, and then he either attempts arousal or doesn't?
Very true, absolutely, because he could be looking to arouse her as a result of perceiving that she's open.
Yeah.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
Pregnancy and things, women might be open, but they're not. You can't get pregnant unless she's actually ovulating.
Absolutely.
So if you have sex or not, or
Yes.
whatever, but if those other circumstances aren't there, if she's not open initially, like actually ovulating,
yeah.
then no matter what else goes on, it's not going to happen.
That is a very good point, and this is some
So
of
rather than always trying to penetrate, if she's obviously not, or the person is obviously not open, then there's no point. Wait until another time.
Exactly. Patience. It's amazing how many of us are like climate, all the things that we're passionate about, all the ideas that we're really passionate about that animate us. How often do we allow our passion about it to override us, and we don't do exactly what you're saying, which is to wait and suss it out. Is there a readiness there? Is it worthwhile? I now realise I do that all the time without worrying about it, and that's why I'll assess the situation, and I won't be worried. I'll be like, I know there's no point. And it's like over time you start to learn that. And I mean, maybe you guys will have experienced it yourselves, especially if you're active in a particular area, that you might notice that there are times when you know there's no point. You know that the person isn't, and it's right, even if you try to arouse them, you know there's not going to be a healthy seed planting there at all. So you're absolutely right, it's a very valid point. So there are lots of subtleties involved in this, but the point is, I'm not here to tell you about those subtleties because you'll be able to see them yourself. You'll be able to spot them in your own interactions. So the point of giving you this model is for you to look at your relationships, for you to look at your interactions and say, all right, that's where that went wrong, or that's where I could have done that better, or that's where that happened, or this sort of thing. What we're going to do is, we're going to have a look at one last area, and then we're going to wrap up. So the area we're going to look at is relationships, intimate relationships. There's an interesting thing that happens in relationships. So you have, people. Okay. Yes.
Yep.
What's that?
That.
Oh, cheers. Thank you very much. Okay, so you have two people, right? And then you have, we're going to draw it here, which is the relationship between them. Because the relationship is something else. You can have two fine people who makes a crap relationship together. It's crap. But they're great people. And we can walk out of a relationship thinking, well, what the hell went wrong there? You know, I'm a good person, they're a good person. How is it that what we made together was crap? And it's because the relation. So what we have going on is we have all our own individual baggages going on, but then we have this thing called the relationship, which is, we all know you're meant to work on the relationship, aren't you? Something like that. And there's more to it than just doing activities together or whatnot. There's a lot involved in it, and I don't plan today on going into any real detail on it. I just want to introduce the idea that the relationship is a third factor. So you have the two people and then the relationship between them, which is almost something in its own right, because it is something you have to feed and nurture independently of your own health and makeup sort of thing. But there's an interesting thing that goes on. This thing we call attraction. Attraction, when you're attracted to somebody. This is a chemical or a biological reaction to something I was talking about earlier, which is the soul giving us a nudge in a particular direction. So the higher self giving us a nudge saying, this person's got something to teach you. This person's got something to show you about yourself. Now it may be minor, maybe nothing, or it could be a massive, massive lesson. You could have a short relationship with a person, or it could last years, depending on what it is you've got to get from it. But the number one thing that's standard about relationships is that you will be attracted to your unknown. You'll be attracted to your unknown. So this is the interesting thing about the massive spread of homosexuality in the post-World War II era, because what happened before was it was traditional that if you manifested as a man, then your unknown would be the woman, and if you manifested as a woman, your unknown would be the man. But as we saw already, the gender models got a massive shake-up, didn't they? They got this huge shake-up. So actually, it wasn't quite so clearly cut. So for a large number of people, their unknown wasn't the opposite gender, it was their gender. So actually what they're attracted to is the same sex as them because that's unknown to them. And so actually they go on their journey of self-realization and all the rest of it by being shown their unknown, basically. See, there's a big silence there. Does everybody sort of grasp that? Even conceptually, even if it's a bit much for you. Because the important thing here, I think, is to break or get away from this damaging mentality against homosexuality, gender confusion, transgender in the in the later half of the 20th century, because it had been viewed very much through the eyes of devotional religion without any understanding of the role gender plays in it. And so the thing is, if every individual is on their journey of evolution, and if somebody is at a particular time, now there's this interesting thing that has happened that kind of makes it a bit murky, and I don't have time to go into it today, but it's very interesting how it's in the wake of this era where people would be growing up and not really knowing, you know, what it is to be a boy or whatever, but feeling really connected to female things or whatever, or the other way around, you know, girls who aren't really that sure about so-called girly things or whatever, but feeling really okay with all the boyish stuff, and then whatever that leads to, it doesn't really matter, but depending on how it goes and depending on the choices that you make, sometimes the soul will say, okay, I'm not able to get through to you directly here, or we're over here in this area too much, so what's going to happen is we now need to show the unknown to you, which is your own sex. And so that's then where the attraction of homosexuality comes from. And actually, out of homosexuality, there has been amazing work in the late 20th century by both men and women about nuances of gender and nuances about what gender is that has been ignored by the rest of society, because these people have actually faced it and questioned it and asked themselves about it and written about it. So there's a wealth of knowledge there for people who want to look into it, basically, that heterosexual and homosexual people can learn from. So I just want to make the point there that actually this model fits everybody. It fits absolutely everybody. It doesn't matter where, you know, it doesn't matter what your sexual inclination is. This works. This applies. It does apply. So in a relationship, there's this interesting thing, because there's two worlds going on. There's a world of your personality where you're getting about and all the rest of it, the lower self. But then there's a world of the soul going on at the same time. And like we said, you can have this really traumatic experience in your relationship, you know. All sorts of things can happen. Emotional trauma, emotional abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, all of these things. We've probably all experienced that level of all of those at some point or another. And while it's traumatic for us to go through, the soul has a totally different experience. It doesn't experience pain in the way that we do, and it doesn't experience other difficulties of living here that we do. So it sticks us through on those journeys to put up with it, basically. But it's all about bringing us into alignment with it. But this really interesting thing happens where the souls will act on behalf of each other. It gets a little bit confusing here. But have you ever been in a relationship where you behaved in a way that you'd never behaved before and you've never behaved since, but only in that relationship did you act that way or do those things? Yeah? Everyone nodding. That's because this is where the soul does take over a little bit. It doesn't dominate, but what it does is these little things will slip out, and they're actually not always for you. Sometimes they're actually for your partner, and it's actually because your soul is helping their soul help that person on their journey. And it's mental. I mean, the relationship, our relationship is this crazy closed loop where it's like really nobody outside that relationship actually knows what's going on. And how we judge things is usually wrong, because what's going on is very much about what's between those two people. And it's very much about the interplay of their lessons for each other. So, well, it's very hard to be general about it, but certainly there are some things that this is where right and wrong and good and bad are a bit grayer, because they're relative terms. What's good for you at one time in your life is bad for you in another. What's bad for you in one time in your life is really good for you in another. And this changes. Our needs change, our desires change, and so do the things which are beneficial or detrimental to us. So actually good and bad and right, these are relative terms, and in a relationship it's true as well. So the issue about, we don't have time to go into all of the details of the emotional self and the mental self that are in play in a relationship, but generally there is so many variables going on that we get stuck in the face value and we don't look to beneath the surface of what might be triggering things. Because the relationship with your partner is a direct reflection of your relationship with your higher self. It's the only direct one. What you'll generally find is out in the world, other relationships that you have, people will be representative of aspects of self. So you might be the bully, or the critic, or the judge, or things like that. So they'll represent different aspects of self, whereas with your partner, it's very direct. It's a direct representation. This is because a lot of the doorways we normally hold closed in our everyday interactions, we have them open in our intimate relationships. So qualities and skills that we aren't very good at using come to play, and that gets in the way. I mean, to throw it onto context, just to give you the framework for this, if you imagine that when you were born, all of us started life in the same way. We all started off like this. Does everyone agree? Roughly. We all started off kicking on a mat, didn't we? Now that was because
you were held by your mum, or if you were kicking on a mat.
That's true. You could have been held. You could be absolutely any context. But the point, the actual point is that we had no control over our body when we first picked it up. It would empty its bowels, it would empty its bladder. The arm might kick out, the leg might kick out, whatever. But the point was, initially we weren't aware of it, or we didn't know how to control it. So that body would kick out and lash out spasmically until we went from a spasmic kicking to a dexterous wielding of this body, to being able to make it walk, to make it talk. All of you did that on your own. All of you did it.
There's some evidence to show that the movement's response to sound and to other things that are happening, so it's not a random.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying it's random. It's not. A lot of the work that I do is about the power of infant consciousness and about the power of how aware we actually are in that state. And we're fully aware of the environment in a way that we're not aware just now. But what happens is, as we go on that journey of developing body awareness, we lose that other awareness. But I actually believe that the perceptual value of an infant is massive. It's not just sound, it's everything they're perceiving, absolutely everything. And this is, if we talk about this idea of soul or higher self, we have this idea that you had a soul or higher self before life and one after life, but we're given this idea in society that when you're in life, it's off on holiday somewhere and you've got to wait until you cash this body in before you can reconnect with it. And it's utter rubbish. The soul is not on holiday. It's immediate, it's imminent, it's present. This idea, this sense of distance, is part of our mental framework. It's an illusion. So we all make a choice in life. If we say we had a soul before life and after life or whatever, then when we all make this choice, we either wait for death to reconnect with the soul, or we can tread what's called the path of return, which is the general name for all self-development systems, which is where we undo what was done to us. We tread back along those mental and emotional pathways, back to when we first picked up these bodies, because that was the last time we had soul awareness. So now, all of us, we've all developed the body awareness, but we're all hungry for the soul awareness. We're all craving to have that back again. But the interesting point about this work is it says that it's not something that was outside this life, it was in this life. You had it when you were born, it was there. But the point was, you didn't have the body awareness. Now you've picked up the body awareness, you're trying to pick that back up again. But there's an interesting thing. We just looked at the physical body there when it woke up. But the emotional body, when it wakes up, is exactly the same. So when the emotional body wakes up around puberty, from birth to puberty, the emotional body is going through its gestation period. It's going through the period like the physical body goes through in the womb. So it has its full awakening at puberty. That's when it's given birth to. And it behaves in exactly the same way as the physical body. It goes like this. It lashes out. First time you felt overwhelmed by shame, guilt, embarrassment, love, anger, all these things, uncontrolled. But all that help you got with the physical body, you didn't get with the emotional body, did you? You didn't get that much help with it. So what ends up happening is we're told that, oh, that emotion's bad, or you don't express that, or you don't do that. So if you could all picture our emotional bodies as walking around, we might have one arm tied up here and a leg up our back sort of thing, you know, and we're pretending that it's not part of us, and every now and again, when it builds up, it suddenly goes like this, and we're like, oh, that's not part of me, I'm sorry, don't know where that came from. That's my dark side, I became possessed, or something like that. And we completely disown it. You know, we disown this aspect of self. But this is, you know, the same happens with the mental body when it awakens as well, but we're given some help with the mental. The main one that causes us problems in relationships is the emotional body. And it's because we've kept it strapped up from such a young age. The only time it gets out properly is in our relationships. But in our relationships, we don't have the same tolerance and acceptance that we did have of other people's physical bodies. So when our partners are perhaps having a moment where that emotional body is spasmically kicking out, we react to it at face value instead of realising what's going on. And it's like, well, actually, they're learning to use that body. So, but when you put it in that context, and if it is being proactive, then it becomes much healthier. But this becomes the major problem in the relationships, because all of these emotional things which only come up in a relationship, we're not very practiced at using them. Look how long it took you to learn to make the body walk. Look how long it took you to be dexterous with your hands. You can be just as dexterous with your emotional self, but only if you give yourself the chance, only if you give yourself the same ability to make mistakes, the same tolerance to fall over, to trip, to stumble, to burn yourself, but all those emotional equivalents. We can never ever ever get healthy at expressing anger unless we try. I mean, I use anger as a good example because anger is the most ostracised of all reactions, all emotions. As soon as it starts to emerge, you're told it's bad and it's wrong and you've got to lock it up. And do you know something? Throughout life, it's not hilarious, it's sad to see that people will do anything to sideways express the fact that they're angry. So the root seed is the same, and that is anger. But you might scream and shout, you might go silent, you might make a crap cup of tea, you might not invite somebody the next time you're going out, you might not speak to them for a while, you might do any of these things, any of 100 different ways of expressing the fact that you're angry, instead of sitting down and saying, I'm angry with you because of this. Now, we're always quite happy to sit down and say to somebody, I'm really happy about this, or I'm really sad about this. But with these really sensitive emotions, is that hitting a nerve with these sensitive emotions? Yeah, absolutely. But it is, and it should, because it's true. You know, we have these sensitive feelings that, and you know, as they lash out, we have to give ourselves it, and this is it, tolerance, gentleness, patience, acceptance. Give them to yourself, give them to your partner. Do you know what I mean? It's something that's so lacking and so neglected, where if we can start to give each other that, this is where boundary comes into it, give each other the healthy boundaries. There are sometimes we're working on the relationship, but sometimes we have to work on ourselves too. And sometimes what happens is our partners bring up those things. Their partners are actually there to help us unwrap the ties that are binding those limbs, those emotional limbs in place. And so as they get unbound, they start to spasm, don't they? And they start to lash out. So once we've done that, if we can understand what's going on, we can give them the space to let that happen. And we can be tolerant and accepting of it. But only if both in it, obviously both have to be engaging and conscious and participating in this. And that is the point of it. It's something that both partners can use and work with, basically. One on their own isn't going to be enough. Then that person who knows, so like if you guys are in relationships and your partner isn't here, you then have to go and do the arousing. So you then have to go and be in the male role and arouse the interest and all that, all those things to say that there is something about gender. There is something important about it. So to go back to this point about how we're bringing the lessons of the soul, you know, the soul helps us to behave in certain ways that will evoke the lessons that our partners need, which is great. It's also very challenging, it's very difficult. But it's very interesting to see how, and it is, all of us would like to think that we're conscious when we're helping guide our partners to see the light and to do the right thing and all the rest of it. But the real lessons come. Let's remember about that maleness thing about prescribing the method. It's not about telling them, it's about demonstrating it. It's about showing the way. That's the key. So it's very common to sit down and talk about it and say, okay, here's the way we're going to do it. But that doesn't always work. So when we're looking at what partners are doing, we have to look beneath the face value of it. So if your partner isn't having sex with you, or if they're not speaking to you, or if they're not listening to you, then actually look to your relationship with your higher self. Where are you maybe not listening? Where are you not being open to your soul's penetrations? All of these things. And what you can do is you can fix your relationship by working on yourself, by actually being able to penetrate beneath, to be able to shut off from that spasmic lash out or whatever it is, and to see beneath it. So let's look at the example before. The seed was anger, wasn't it? But it could express itself in a million different ways. And it's the same with all of our expressions. What we have to do is like, let's look at giving to charity. I could go to give to charity because it's altruistic and it's something I want to do. But I could go and give to charity because I want the social status and I want my friends to know about it and all this sort of thing. It's the same act, but the intention is completely different. So these are two different ways it can happen. You can have the same seed give rise to 1,000 different events, or you can have the same event with a few different causes. And so this is where it is a puzzle. It is challenging, but at least this gives a model and a framework to look into that puzzle, that great mystery, but gives you something to work on. So looking at this idea of the reflection of the soul, and so when there are problems in your relationship, look at your own relationship with your soul. What's going on? Just ask yourself that and and ask your own guidance, because that's the point. I can't tell you. You've got to develop that relationship with your higher self where it's going to guide you to the point of understanding, and it will. It wants to. The lessons have been presented in your life for that purpose, to take you to that point so that you can realise it, so you can move beyond it. So the answers are going to be there for you. You just need to detach for a moment and not get lost in the gender tension or the emotional tension or what the face value of what's going on, and try to bury beneath the surface. And you can, you can take your relationship to whole new levels that way. And places where it may have stagnated or may have got stuck before, you can find ways to make it move on. So that's pretty much all we've got time for today. It's an awful lot to take in. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And anything they want to add to it? Any thoughts that they've had?
Can I just ask, on the relationship side of things,
Yes.
just something that sprung to mind was when you were saying that the person you attract may be mirroring something that you're not listening to within your higher self. For example, take that instance. And you can see that, and you recognise that, and you recognise they're there to show you a lesson. But what happens if you don't want to repair the relationship with that person because they're completely wrong for you? Is that person, therefore, do you think, part of the lesson just to show you that part of the journey where you're at?
Absolutely.
And then because you're talking about repairing the relationship.
Yeah, you don't have to.
If you don't.
Sometimes the realisation is that relationship has run its course.
Right.
And to realise that you have grown in different directions. Because that's often what happens. Is sometimes relationships are about helping you define yourself, helping you find out who you are. And often the person you become isn't the person that your partner liked in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And it's good to see that that's okay, and to keep the respect for the person because of that, because they've helped you get to that point of knowing what it is you like or don't like, or knowing who it is you are or what you want to do, because they maybe challenged you on that, they maybe didn't let you do the things you wanted to do, or they maybe represented your initial ideal of what you thought a relationship was, and then you experienced it and realised it wasn't. And so we should have respect for those intimate relationships. We should have ultimate respect for, because they are the ones which help us define who and what we are. And it's a very healthy place to know when a relationship has run its course, and to be able to respond to that, and to be able to act on that, to say, actually, I can see now that this has run its course, and actually we now need to spend some time nurturing and conceiving all the seeds that have been planted in this relationship. And it's almost a shame that you can never bring the fruits of a relationship to bear with that person, because they've helped you to develop it. But at least the next person tends to get the benefit of it, because as long as you give yourself the chance, you need to give yourself the time to digest, to nurture, to conceive, and to allow those things to manifest in you and to make those changes. Because we all have it in relationships, the changes that we want to make, and it's so difficult to do it in that closed framework, in that closed relationship loop. It's very tricky, and sometimes we do have to set ourselves free just to be able to say, I need to work on me now. Do you know what I mean? I've had so much from this, I've got to let it sink in. Obviously, it rarely happens that coherently or pleasantly in a relationship. Normally, maybe some screaming, I hate you, I never want to see you again, and walk away or something like that. You never know. But it doesn't matter how it manifests. And this is the thing, you can have it end in a horrible manifestation and it still be perfectly right. I mean, I've had some relationships that were terrible, and they had some horrible endings, and I look back on them and I'm not happy about it. But they have given me some of the most profound lessons and the profound insights and real levels of compassion about how difficult it is, and all of the challenges that we have in mastering ourselves. There's a lot involved, and there are very, very powerful forces that flow through our bodies, and when they lash out and when they flow uncontrolled, they are powerful, and they can cause harm, and they can harm us, they can harm others. And this is where this is where we need to find compassion both for ourselves and others, because we've hurt people just like we've been hurt. And it's only when we start to look at how manipulative and how bad we've actually been that we can truly find compassion. You know, it's only when we see how bad we've actually been to others, because then it's like, and the difficulty of the journey of making those changes and facing those aspects of self, that's when you find real compassion, because you know how hard it is, because it's not easy. And while I've presented this in a very, very general and easy to look way, it's not easy. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's fun, other times it's difficult. But one thing I'll guarantee, it's rewarding. And another thing I'll guarantee is it works. Because I've been working with this for over 10 years now, and I have to say, I've been blown away a number of times, because you can actually ignore the surface behaviours. You can ignore what's going on, and as long as you make the necessary changes within yourself, the right changes happen out in the world, and it's amazing. It's mad. It's genuine magic. It's genuine mystery, and it's genuinely unfathomable. But it's an interesting thing. It's like making this body move, right? I have no idea how I do that. I've got no idea how I make my hands move. No idea. But all I need to know is I can do it. I don't need to know how. It's the same with this, and it's the same with moving about in the world. And it's the same with anything to do with self-development. If you don't first of all believe, if you don't first of all have the idea that it's potential, then you're closed. You're not open to it. It's never going to happen. That's why you can never convince a skeptic. You might as well, you don't waste your breath. There's no point, because they're not open. You know, skeptics are a good example, actually, because it's interesting how it doesn't matter how much information you can present to a skeptic, you know, they'll still not be open to it because they don't want to be. You know. So this part here about the relationships, just to wrap, it is something that's a lot bigger. There's a lot more in that, and it's worth working on it in a relationship. Like I say, I do workshops on it and whatnot, so I have a mailing list. If you want to go on it, if there's one going on in your area, I'll let you know about it, or you can come to Manchester, which is where I'm based, something like that. The other thing is that I'm not here just to chuck these ideas at you and then run away going, ha ha ha. My point is to help you understand it, to help you see how to apply it, to help you see how to use it. So get in touch with me. I'll give you my card with my number on it, my email on it. Ask me questions. I'm very aware of the fact that I've just planted the seed here. I don't expect any harvest. Do you know what I mean? But what I am very interested in doing is watering that seed as it's growing, to make sure that you can have a healthy delivery of it. So please, get in touch with me. I'm very open to that. That's the point. Is if there's an interesting quirk going on that you just want to talk about or clarify or something like that, get in touch with me. You've been here now. We're all members of a big happy family. But if you see me around the rest of the weekend, come and talk to me as well. I hope you have a lovely festival. If you do have any questions, please ask. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very welcome.